know some of you. Some of you I've probably met and haven't seen you in over 5 years. So forgive me if I don't recognize you, because I've just been lost up in the woods up there. I really am, like, not quite in the woods, but I can get to the woods in 5 minutes, So I'm a little, didn't need the encouragement of a pandemic to get me to completely retreat into my own little dream world. So that seemed like an appropriate title for the show, because sometimes it's more nightmarish than dreamlike, but that's okay. That's still valid.
Right.
Dalia had asked me if I wanted to do something, and I immediately wanted to do a small group, because this is too big a space for me not to feel petrified of doing a solo show in. I'm just that way, because I'm working a little smaller than usual right now. So I just, my approach to doing anything like that is to, first of all, think of the handful of people I really want to work with just because I love their work, not necessarily because of any particular thing that they're doing that relates to me or any particular theme or idea, but just because this 3 people whose work I dearly love, like to the very core of who I am, and I also love them as human beings. So, like, what more basis do I need than that there? And I was going to say something that sounded really smart. And just sorry. Anyway, so as I said to Rosie in a comment somewhere yesterday, she talked about, she said something about how well curated this show is. Like, this is not, the artists are curated, the work is not curated at all. I just trusted the people whose work I love to come up with something that they love, and somehow magically it'll all come together, and it actually kind of did. And I have faith in that as a system or a strategy for putting something together, just sort of spit out something that is a vague idea, or is sort of, it sounds evocative, but it's also completely ambiguous and broad. And could be really anybody's interpretation, and leave that alone and invite the people to work and get the hell out of their way and leave them alone and trust that it'll all come together. Like, trust has always had a lot to do with how I do things, and for my money, it worked pretty well. We have this weird bunch of stuff that all kind of hangs together in some mysterious way to me, and I can't even, I don't know if I could identify with language what it is that each of us is doing, but it feels very right to me. She's the language girl. I'm the Luzhen mind girl. So.
Should we introduce Scott and Sarah? So Scott, yeah, go ahead.
Scott Northrup, my I don't know, my bestie for the rusty, like since day one. I don't even know. It turns out we were in classes at Wayne together that I didn't even realize until years later.
When you cried in front of a wall of Polaroids I put up.
Oh, that's what it was. Of course. Our best experiences involve me crying and him sort of standing and looking at me like, God, I hope she's not going to cry all night. Like, that's our most common interaction.
Crier dance.
Crier dance. There you go. So that's Scott. He's brilliant and amazing at CCS. He gives his life to his students and bleeds on the floor for them on a regular basis. But they love him and he loves them. And this is Rosie. Like, that's another one, man. I don't know. From the very minute we met, it's like, where the hell have you been hiding? Like, I feel like we have known each other on this kind of level since before we were born. I don't know. We were sort of swimming around in the ether pool together at some point. I can't explain it.
I'm actually I time traveled. Maybe you time traveled. Later it will turn out that I was you the whole time.
Makes perfect sense. Makes perfect sense. And Luzhen, I have worshipped the ground she walked on, again, from the very moment I met her. These works or pieces, very much like them, are among the first I ever saw of her work, and I fell head over heels immediately and knew I wanted to have herself and her work in my life for as long as I could get away with it.
Same.
Luzhen
Same.
kind of reached out and saved my life for a little while when I was making the transition to move up north. She put up with me and my insane deranged kitty cat for a little while, and
No, actually, you saved my life.
gracious and sweet about it. And so, I mean, just look at this stuff. This, my very favorite thing about Luzhen's work, and it's totally ego-driven, is she put an image of a piece that's sort of an amalgam of two pieces that I made. That in the gallery, you can see that one with the rabbit ears. That's a combination, two pieces combined to make one. And she actually, in the gallery, stood in the skirt of this giant puppet lady, and I have a picture of it somewhere. And it's just one of my favorite things that ever happened with my work. And then she put it in her piece, and it's like, oh, God, way to go, Luzhen. Stab me in the heart, why don't you? So I've talked enough for me.
Okay. Well, I thought the idea of this being about a dream really opened it up and really allowed all of your work to kind of flow together. And I think I told you, Scott, that I felt like one of your drawings, it all being together here, because I feel like I'm in all of your subconsciouses, and I don't know, I think it's a really interesting exhibition because of that. I really get lost in your dolls. So maybe we can start with you, Sarah, with the dolls. I mean, not the dolls, the doll houses, because you worked on these throughout 2020?
I've been working on them for several years. They have kind of come along as a group of work. I moved to a new house in 2017, and because selling my own house gave me some economic freedom, I was able to complete moving into my house and have a house finished. So then I immediately started creating small houses, because apparently I am only happy when I'm working on developing a house space of some kind. And not needing to do it in my own home, I started doing it in micro homes, which is slightly more affordable, but not that much more affordable. So actually not on display here is the first one that I worked on, which is a perfect scale dollhouse that almost replicates my current house. And I got it really perfect. I reclaimed some sort of obscure Japanese brand kitchen dollhouse furniture that I had when I was a child, and rebuilt the whole house around it. And I finished it, and I was like, this is perfect. And I still want to make a dollhouse. And so I got another one, but then I realized, having done a perfect scale completely, I didn't have to be constrained by scale anymore. And that one was what became Baby House. And things get weird really fast when you let scale drop. It just became instantly surreal. And I think that really opened something up for me, because within each of these pieces, and I am a branching talker, so also just pinch me at a certain point. I think it's interesting that Mary made these figures that are explicitly portraits of the participants in the show. But then you have Luzhen, who put one of Mary's pieces in one of her pieces. And then back behind me in Garden House, there's a figurine, the body of which is a pouch that Mary made that I got at her estate sale when she was moving. So I made a Mary also. And then our good friend Corey observed that I had made this piece, but the way Corey always says things, everybody is on her frequency, which is a much higher frequency that only the angels can hear.
Yes, exactly.
And she was like, it's so funny that Mary made a portrait of you and that you made a portrait of Mary. And I'm like, fuck, I did make a portrait of Mary. Because
she does have a giant eye in the middle of her head.
Yeah, and then Mary comes into the gallery with this piece with the giant floating eyes everywhere. And it's and the basis of both these pieces is a piece of fabric printed with a Virgen de Guadalupe, so a Mary. So it is a Mary. So that I thought was interesting, but has nothing to do with the dollhouses. Thank you.
It's great.
Oh, it has to do with it in as much as I collect small pieces of other, either art that I made on my own, like the chandelier in Travel House was like an earring I made. It's like there, that little thing with a red flower in it hanging in the lower part. That was like an earring I made, but then never wore and then just hung up in my studio. And I'm like, this is a piece, but I don't know what it is a piece of. And when I started making the houses, suddenly there was this place where all of the weird things that I obsessively collect, whether they're miniatures or tiny art objects or whatever, or like a doll head, which I had to like keep in a drawer so I didn't look at it. Suddenly this became a place where I could use them as materials rather than just hoard them like a demented crow.
I love the dryer.
The dryer lint. Yeah.
The dryer lint. Like, yeah, you use really interesting pieces.
Which to me also is the soul of being a fiber artist, is that I'm just willing to grab anything and make it art materials. It's not so much about a specific relationship with fabric, but like an openness with materiality that like everything becomes in play.
If it feels good enough in my hands.
That's right. It's like a material driven practice, I think.
When you were working on these, were you like in a trailer in California? Like you were traveling a lot, weren't you? Or no?
Oh, I'm always traveling a lot, somewhat. These came out of me having this new home space and finally shoring up my homestead in a way where I didn't have to be constantly working on it. So I finally had, and I like what Mary said about trusting artists, because I think what I observe is that anytime you give artists a little breathing room, they immediately like shit pile more art projects on themselves. Like, I don't know any artist who's like, thanks for the money, I'm going to the Bahamas. They're always like, now I've bought now I can buy a blowtorch or like whatever. They're like always double down. Yeah. And so I think that is like finally having space, finally like establishing a space where I could work. And like miniatures is a long form practice for me. Like I can't work very long on any given one or I get like bonkers.
Is it too obsessive to?
Yeah, or I feel like I'll overload them. Like I'm already a maximalist. So when you get maximalist in a tiny, tiny space, it could get really, but I mean, a previous well-known miniature of mine is my hoarder house, where I hoarded a dollhouse at 1/12 scale. And you would think even that you could do it quickly, but really it took me like 7 years to hoard the dollhouse. Like,
hoarders work on that stuff for a lifetime.
It's a lifetime of work. It is. And you can't make it right unless you hoard it in real time. But I'll stop talking now. I feel self-conscious.
Okay, what about you, Scott?
Yeah.
What's up with you? What's up, Scott?
I was just thinking with what you were saying about pieces speaking to each other through portraits of each other, and my stuff is not about any of them. It's all me in the back room. And it's very much, when Mary asked me to do this show, you're right, it was just around the time the pandemic started, I think. So everything kind of shifted in a way, I think for everybody. Just figuring out what I was even doing. Yeah, and Val's here from CCS, and I'm just looking at you right now, thinking about how our lives changed as instructors and how much of our personal life became preparing to teach in a new way, right? So it was really hard for me to even think about what I was making, how to even get back in the studio. That time was really precious. So yeah, it was, for me, it was a lot about collecting, gathering things. I shift things around on my tables all the time. They start to gravitate to each other and become something else. And I actually had a really hard time starting to attach them to become these things because everything felt uncertain. And I know I've said this many times, but the past year and a half felt like science fiction from the very beginning to me. So dreams, ideas, like it all just kind of flowed because what was my waking life? I've had insomnia for 8 months. I don't know, and I think a lot of that is just directly in there, intentionally or unintentionally. It's part of how the work got made, for sure. And it started with actually that first piece on the right, the two boys, called Dinker Donker. That's what my mom's brothers called their penises when they were little. And they just made sense. But again, I didn't glue them down. I think I took some cell phone pics and sent them to friends because I was like, what am I doing? What am I doing? I'm playing with these like paper dolls. And in a way, that started to make even more sense as I was seeing what other people were working on and being aware of Luzhen's work. And I think in all the work, you know, now that I've had some time to spend with it here at the gallery, I think there's a great sense of collage in everything. You know, I think of Mary's the white embroidery over there, or like Sarah's pieces right here. And there's just such a sense of all these things coming together to make something new. And for me, collage is, it just makes the most sense because I ingest so many things all day, right? Images, we're just always with images. And kind of taking that and making my sense out of that, my own logic, and reassembling the world. Yeah. Would you like me to say more?
Happy birthday, happy belated birthday. Everybody say happy birthday to Scott.
It was 2 weeks ago.
So really, yeah, we've been holding that in for 2 weeks. So Luzhen, talk to us, Luzhen. Tell us about these beautiful pieces of yours.
Okay, thank you. First, I want to thank everybody come over here. Thank you, Mary, for organizing us. They have this wonderful show. Thank you, Dalia. And Marian and I feel like it's like lifelong friend. And so I got so much inspiration from Mary's work and personality, and also her work too. And then just I feel like we both have sometimes through work we speak each other. So it's kind of it's really wonderful. And so you can tell I steal Mary's works and I got into my work. Sometimes I follow her, So I ask her all the time, about Mary, what do you think about this color? What do you think about that? And then we talk to each other, So it's really great, for artists, to share each other's work and and talking about what's the solution about this problem, that problem, and this Scott work. I love Scott work very much, and also and Sarah's Scott works. Although mine's like I put a lot of content in the work. It's like so chaotic. I try to organize through the chaotic content, and Scott is like more minimal. But I think his voice is so big, and I just first time when I see his work, I feel like it deeply touched my heart, and so. I remember when I saw his film, I started crying. And that's really something beautiful about the life, whenever we through so much difficulty, but still we keep going, and also keep solving problems in artwork, and we still have this enthusiasm to produce work. So, I'm very grateful, have a Scott and Mary and in my life, just, share works and inspire each other. And then Sarah, when I see the work over here, just to remind me of my childhood, because although I'm Chinese, but my favorite things when I was a child, I just loved to sneak into abandoned house. Really, it's just by myself, and then you see those wallpapers, and then you see those, little chairs over there, a bed over there. I really enjoy so much. I imagine, what kind of thing could happen. What kind of family, how many membership over there. It's about the story. So I think I'm very interested in making story. And hopefully it's not like a totally illustration kind of way. I still want to come back to the painting, like in between illustration and the painting kind of, narrative, making narrative story. So, one time, I think, Scott, you probably forgot it. One time you said, my work is like a mapping image. Absolutely. I just using this. I think I'm making story by using image mapping from one to other. Mm-hmm. So I don't use a fixed perspective. So usually in my work is kind of like a motion train, your eyes from here to there to traveling. So this is also like a reminder of, even Sarah's work. And then we see once your eye got into the whole object inside the house inside, your eyes getting so busy, collect all informations. and you can smell, and then you imagine. So it's so interesting, you know. I think it's interesting to how to grab audience, you know, stay in your work for how long, you know, whether you're making story and maybe other way to, you know, attract them. So that's I'm kind of interested in that. Yeah, so, yeah.
That was beautiful.
Thank you
That
so
was.
much. Yeah.
I think something you said, maybe the thing, I agree that we're all doing collage in some way. And I also, in using the idea of dreams, and we did not really coordinate with each other that much. We had 2 group calls where we were like, we're doing a show, right? Yeah, cool. I'm gonna bring some stuff. You're gonna bring some stuff? And we're all like, yeah, we don't know what. And like, okay. But like, I can follow there's a narrative that I see in terms of like, even Scott saying it's just me back there. Like, I see his installation as that liminal space where you're falling asleep. And maybe you're like replaying scenes in your day and they're starting to break up or get a little weird, but like you still have like your ego or you're somehow in your own space. And as you move into Luzhen's, like things start to sort of like, there's that moment where you've like gone into something else and things are coming out of the walls.
The REM.
Yeah.
State. Like, so, yeah.
And like it gets colorful and it gets abstracted, like whatever you're doing. And then it comes into mind and like now maybe you're in some weird scenarios and it's bad and like your old landlord is there or like your child is there, like whoever is there and stuff is happening and there's just a lot and it's overwhelming. And then almost I see like Mary's section is like the document of that dream where like sometimes you wake up and you have just like one image left or like there was one figure that came through really clearly and like you're waking up and you're trying to hold on to it. And I love that like her darkest piece segues right back into Scott's where it's like, and it just, think about that, and then there's like these fully dimensional, I mean, these are essentially dream catchers of a sort, but like in the same way that something that like has always really compelled me about Mary's work is like cultural acknowledgement without appropriation. Like, Mary has a clear fascination with like folk art traditions from all over the place, like has done research on that, but also is just like a visual sponge. Like of all the people, normally I hate it when people tag me in things on Facebook, but Mary, it's like a special curated feed where Mary's like, hey, and it's always like something amazing. Like, and it's clear that you're just always looking at art and then it comes through the filter of your experience. So like I can see that, I mean, this could be any number of things. It's a chandelier, it's a swarm, it's like, but it's also a dream catcher. And so I think like, it's rare that I see a group show that is organized around a theme, but is not like war and war is bad or like, you know what I mean? Where it was like all of us like built a dream. And as you were speaking, I was thinking that I often have trouble with what I call like conceptual art, which I think is my shorthand for when somebody makes the idea first and then builds stuff around it. Because it always feels like really forced to me. Yeah. And I think all of us are intuitive makers. And that's why our art is like a subconscious experience, is because we're like letting things come together rather than being like, I'm gonna make a piece about this. So like I need a pile of bullets and some bloody gauze. Like instead it's like, I'm gonna see what happens. And we're kind of letting that like back of brain part put ideas.
When Mary said trust, you know, trusting us, but then we also have to trust ourselves and the material.
Yes.
And, yeah.
One thing that I never leaves my mind about Luzhen working on pieces similar to these. I'm not sure if any of these are the same ones. You remember the early ones you had at PCCA that were still kind of floating? Yeah. And you said at the time, like you might have still been hanging them, but you said, one of these days I want this to be like a movie. And I could see you stepping into this film that goes from one to the other, and it's this weird travel-scape and some strange adventure that this little tiny girl is having, because you show up in almost all of these. You're in there, like you look for the little girl. It's Luzhen, this little tiny thing, overwhelmed by everything around her in a way. But I always think of that, and one of these days it's going to happen where we will find the right group of people to come together and make these layered fever dreams, and you will be walking in among them with little animals and fish swimming and all kinds of things. I don't know, I can never get rid of that thought, and I always see that when I look at these particular kind of compositions that you should know also, Luzhen has another show up at Anton Art Center right now.
Mm-hmm. It's amazing.
And if you don't know her and don't look at the sort of abstract qualities of these, you would never put together that it's the same person. They're completely different. They're different materials, different way of working, and she has this capacity to just, I'll never understand how she does it, but
well, these series is, I named it, titled them, called the Purple Mountain series. It's from my hometown. You know, I live in China, in Hangzhou. So it's a dream. I mean, I'm restless, like nighttime I have a dream all the time, and the daytime I dream also. So it's kind of my personality is like, probably I dislike the mass of the world. Mm-hmm. And so I, try to take a refuge into those words. Mm-hmm. So that's comforting myself, and also I making, some question how to put an image together. Basically, we all visual artists, how to compositionally working, how to put them together. That's the, that's always a formal issue, the form. So yeah, content and form try to, work together. That's always, my dream. And so they feed each other, sometimes doing a lot of abstract work, and also sometimes doing this more narrative. Personally, I love more narrative because I love to tell a story, and I love to listen story. And then, but it's always feeding each other because it's a visual art, you want to, those basic things. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, I'm sorry, can I ask a quick question? Were you working on each one at the same time? Do you work on one and also this one and also this one, or do you work on one?
I work on multiple, because I could get sometimes I could stuck, especially by the end. In the beginning, I was fresh. You have I don't pre-plan for the composition. I just, there's certain things I come up in my mind, impact, so I just draw those, and then I start to mapping the image from images to creating my own story. And however, I got stuck, and so I really curse my work, and then so I just put it aside. And then I do another one, and then later on, I feel like, okay, then that's not that bad. Okay, let's just continue the story. So both, but mostly once you go to getting to the end, you have to pull them together. So yeah, it's not like really like assembly line. You work at multiple, just but I will focus one by one.
That's the same how I do with the houses. Like I would start a room, I would start building it, and then I would get a piece of something else and be like, this doesn't fit in this house at all. So now I need to start another house. And then I have like a wall of 6 of them where I'm like, oh God, it just keeps, and like eventually. And then for a while I was in a practice of I would just pull down the one that I liked the least and work on it until it was the one I liked the best. And then put it back up and then pull down the one I liked the least and like keep trying to improve them. I also thought something you were saying about narrative, and something I think is present in all of our work, is experiments with like the depersonalized self. Like all of us have work that is hyper personal, and all of us have work that features some kind of avatar, like quite literally of ourselves, but also very figuratively. And like when I say, like, I sort of love the little tableau of the 4 of us on that shelf, because it reminds me of like, when you have a dream about someone and something fucked up happens in the dream, and then the next time you see them, you feel weird. Like they did something to you or you did something to them, but it wasn't them, right? It was like a little doll of them in your head that you had like used in your psychodrama play in your mind. And in the same way that like you have the child of you, like over here, this is a child version of myself, and then also a 20s version of myself. And like Scott talking about like dinker donker, and like, you know, it's like we're all finding these sort of proxies for ourselves and for each other in our work and in our subconscious. And like, I think understanding, to me, this is like what the internet looks like, is like this kind of projection of self. And like, it's strange when somebody looks at your internet persona or your art and is like, great, I understand everything about you. And it's like, no, it's a like, I have used myself as an inspiration or as a material here, but it's not me. And like, there's something about like how each of us have done that in a really distinct way. And like, and again, I just love that like we've sort of picked up pieces of each other, either intentionally or inadvertently. And like those two little white figures that are by the foot of the bed there, like really touch something for you. And like, you know, and there's just like these pieces that like people gravitate towards or like are repelled by, sometimes simultaneously, because they're relatable, but they're like so personal, and they're also completely depersonalized, which I think is interesting.
One thing I wanted to say is I never do anything without being completely riddled with doubt. And as confident as I act sometimes, that's all a show. I am completely ravaged by doubts at all times. And I stopped many times and said to myself, what the fuck am I doing in this world as it is right now, working on a show premised on life is but a dream. It's like, how fucking self-indulgent is that? It's like, excuse me, but, and I've been kind of grappling with that, and am I just escaping into something to protect myself from, I'm sorry, this absolutely terrifying world? And I feel like that's been our job for 2.5 years. I don't know, like it's, I told my doctor one time, I'd be worried about somebody who's not depressed right now.
Right,
right. Worried about whether I'm depressed, worry if I'm not, because that means
it's worse than we
some
thought.
Weird fugue state that I'm not even coming out of. But I don't know how to grapple with the idea that part of me somewhere thinks that we all should be activists and constantly battling on all fronts. But if I try to do that with my work, I feel it does not feel like
genuine.
Talking.
It doesn't feel genuine, right?
It feels forced and contrived. You know, one of the last conversations I had with Peter Williams, I don't know if any of you knew him, but he's been a lot on my mind. He was a lot on my mind as I was working on some of this.
With his class where we met.
Yeah. And sorry, I'm going to get all weird about Peter. Losing him is a huge loss to the world, to me personally, to anybody who ever met him or interacted with him, anybody who was lucky enough to have been his student. Huge loss, but he has spent the last couple of years working like an insane man on fire, like getting it out as hard and fast as he can, and very much activist, very confrontational, but at the same time beautiful and comical and surreal and what the hell, lush and crazy patterns. And I've never seen anybody pour so much out in this contracted period of time. And I was talking to him about that. It's like, am I nuts for just like, it's not that I'm avoiding activism or anything specific like that in my work, but I just feel like it's not me talking if I try to talk directly about that. And he reassured me, it made me feel better about it, and so I kind of quit worrying about it. But it's something that's always going to be, I don't know. Yes. I am not the person who can use my work to be like a megaphone. I don't know. I don't know how to. I don't know how to reconcile that. So I'm always going to be a little bit screwed up about it. But if Peter said it's okay, it's okay.
I mean, and it's been since the pandemic, these 2 years where, and I feel like even as a gallery, to feel like this is what we're doing, and people are dying, and people are going through much. Sadness and tragedy and from all over, not just through the pandemic, you know, through everything, like floods and fire. So I think like to create something in response to all of that chaos and to make something beautiful, or something not just beautiful because it's more than that, but to create with all those, in spite of all those things, I think it's really important, and it keeps the energy of other artists to keep working, you know, not to feel like you can't make something because you feel, I don't know, you won't be heard, or
Well, I think we also, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
We were just talking before we started, and it's like, we have to do this. Like, I have to make things. It makes me feel better.
Right.
The exchange with my students makes me feel better. Going back to my studio, and even if I'm not making something that day, but being in that space for myself, and I know that that's luxurious. I get that, and but I have to do it, or because I think it'll be worse if I don't. You know what I mean? And I feel the same way, especially seeing Peter's work these last years. It's just been, he blows me away. You know,
just like gutted by it.
Yeah. So yeah, I know what you're saying, and for me, I've always made very, you mentioned, I think intimate was a word you used before, maybe not today, but some other time, but I often make very intimate work. Even my larger scale installations are actually about those smaller details and connections. It's not about big statements. It's about being, I think for me, it's about being alive. It's about being here. If that makes sense.
I also just, I don't think it's selfish. I don't think it's frivolous. And like, I don't think you can change anything if you don't change first. Right. And it doesn't mean that self-work has to be exclusive to activism or like public facing or interactive work, but that any change that I'm trying to like soapbox about is ultimately super inauthentic if I haven't experienced it. And that like, I think a lot of the problems that we face are rooted in capitalism and like for-profit systems that commodify all activity. And when I spend, 200 hours like embroidering a 4 by 4 inch square space, that is like the most counter-capitalist thing ever. Like, because it's
impossible to put a value on this that is
that's
going
right.
to reflect what went into it.
That's right. And that's because I'm not interested in placing a dollar value on my time.
Right.
And that's not how I price my work at all.
Yeah.
And like I essentially price my work based on how much I want to give it away or not.
Yeah.
Because these things are meaningful to me, and they're like an extraction of ideas that otherwise are stuck inside, physically inside, like metaphorically inside me, but it's lodged in there, and I can't do anything until they're out there. And like the ability, I think it is not nothing to take an idea from a place where no one else can see it and put it where someone else can. Like ultimately, in terms of communication and how we relate to one another, everything is so subjective that like, and maybe because I am a slightly neurodivergent person, like sometimes one-to-one communication with another person is very hard for me. And having a third-party object that can become the locus of a place to relate to other people is super helpful, and allows me to be in conversation with people who are dead. It allows me to be in conversation with people who haven't been born yet. Like when I think about all of the things that humans make every day that will like never disappear from the face of the earth for hundreds and thousands of years, I don't think it's that self-indulgent to make intentional objects.
Just let her in. She'll be fine.
You just reminded me something that D.A. Pennebaker, documentary filmmaker, that he had said. He made Ziggy Stardust and Spiders from Mars and a bunch of other things.
Do it.
But he said, you know, the best thing for him about being a maker, documentary artist, whatever, was that he can find something cool and show that to someone else. And you just, like what you just said, kind of makes sense of that. Yeah. I like what you said.
Thank you. I just don't. Also, I think I've said this multiple times. People are probably tired of it, but like I find as like a touchstone in my own thoughts and practice with art, the fact that like art has existed since humans lived in caves is extremely meaningful to me. because like that means that art is a humanities priority back at a time when other priorities were like keeping a fire going and running away from saber-toothed tigers. Like, no kidding. It's that old. And that means it is like, it predates commerce, it predates money, it predates surplus. Like, if somebody is in a cave painting, somebody else is bringing them food and tending the fire and like making sure that there's no tigers around. Right. And that is like, that's how crucial art is. So whenever it comes to this, like, oh, it's somebody else, like, no, it's not self-serving. It's humanity serving. It's, you know, like, procreation is making people and creation is making meaning. And without both of those things, humanity is awash. Like,
we have to share our stories. I feel like that's how cultures continued on to share them.
And I think the pandemic, I mean, a lot of artists I know did kind of well during the pandemic. Yeah. And I think one of the reasons is because artists are in the, either born into or highly trained into making sense of chaos.
Right.
And so like everybody else, normies, who like draw a lot of meaning and identity from like what your job is or like what's for dinner or like how are my kids doing, and like those things are kind of crutches or reflections that like give meaning without, they're like just add water. Life just add water, where like artists are like, oh, did everybody else just notice that the world is fucking nutso? Like all of us have been like, are you seeing the shit? Like since the day we were born, and are just like, did you see what just happened there? Like, I'm going to make a little drawing in case you need to see it slower to understand how crazy it is.
Right.
And like the things that I am attracted to, like these objects that I grab as I'm like going through the life, are often objects that like, I cannot understand what they are in the time it takes for me to walk past them. So I have to be like, why is there like this ultra detailed, like slutty Betty Boop keychain that costs 39 cents? Like, how could so much work go into making something so weirdly misogynistic and arbitrary, and like a whole system of production exists to make this happen? Why? Like, what is it telling me? Like, you have to take it home and interrogate it. And I think that's true. You know, like artists, I think, are all trying to resolve problems.
Yes.
It's just that our problems are really weird.
Right.
And other people are like, why do you have a problem with that magazine? And you're like, I don't know, but I got to cut pieces of it out and put them in other places to make it make sense.
Right. So we'll open it up to questions, but I wanted to ask just one more thing is, thinking about, do you feel like there's a trend, like looking back at what has been created throughout this crazy time? Do you feel like, and how do you feel about it? You know, how do you feel about having created or being in the art community during this time? Do you feel like there's a difference? Do you feel like we benefited? I mean, obviously you said, some of us have.
I just said the thing. I just anticipated it.
You know, like, do you all feel like that? Do you all feel that it allowed you to, this weird time that allowed you to, I mean, I know you felt weird about it.
Give me an excuse to stay home and make art. Oh man, what a bummer. Like, if anything, I've gotten more inclined to just, it's not that I reject the world, it's just that I don't necessarily have to live in it. You know, beyond my clock in at work and clock out at work, if I don't have to go anywhere besides to the woods or the beach, I'm not going. You know, I've become not antisocial, but more asocial than I ever have been. And I've always struggled a little bit in like a crowded opening reception. I'm okay if I have like a person I can glom onto and kind of hang with them and sort of pretend that I'm okay with 40 people coming at you. But I like, give me an excuse to not go out and do things and be involved in a world. And it's like, oh,
yeah.
Can I have some more crayons, please? You know?
Yeah.
I'll go as long as you want me to. You know, that's kind of my.
So has it changed your process, like?
Yeah, my entire living space. I mean, it's always kind of been that way. Like whatever living space I have, eventually evolves into if it's a surface, it's a work surface, you know, like, except for the kitchen, I kind of leave the kitchen alone, but like, what's a dining room? I don't know. It's a place with another table with a sewing machine. You know?
Right.
It's just kind of, yeah, it's just led me to just be more of myself on a more consistent basis. So that's a good thing.
What about you, Scott? Did it change your? I mean, you took on a different job and at the college and everything. So did
Yeah,
it
I was
change?
going to say I don't know if I have the perspective to even answer that question.
Right?
I feel like I'm
You have
still
no
in
distance.
it. You know,
You're just
yeah,
like right
I'm
on
just
it,
constantly in it. And like even this work, I was thinking when I got here today, it's also fresh. I haven't really lived with it yet. You know,
Right.
it's really hard to answer that question for me. I don't know.
What about you, Luzhen? Did it change your process?
Not really. Yeah, but of course it got a really big impact on me this pandemic because I deal with both both culture. I know the story happened over there, and I know the story happened here, and that's really for some people can really be content and you be quiet, and for me, just personality, I get angry, but I think I still probably could making through the work, I could still probably relieve my anger a little bit, or maybe put the anger into that. So, I mean, since so who cares, right? That's my work. I could just do whatever I want, right? So, yeah.
Great. Well, thank you all for coming, and thank you to our artists.